Welcome everyone to Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and since we just passed the anniversary for the Battle of Chancellorsville, I wanted to read you a first-hand account of a soldier that was in the Stonewall Brigade. His name was Ted Barclay, and he was in the 4th Virginia. His account of the Battle of Chancellorsville and the death of Stonewall is a wonderful insight to the battle, so I hope you enjoy. Friday, May 8th, 1863. Dear ones at home, I suppose that you think that it is time I was writing if in the land of the living, but after I give you an account of my wanderings for the last 10 or 12 days, I think you will acquit me of any intentional delay. We left our old camp on Tuesday the 28th of April, marched to Hamilton's Crossing, and stayed all night, and the next day and night under the shelling of the enemy's cannon stationed on Stafford Heights. Soon, on the morning of the 30th, we left Hamilton's in a dense fog, which concealed our movements, moved up the river, Rappahannock 10 or 12 miles, driving the enemy slowly before us, camped that night in an open field, all feeling that on the morrow we would have to be engaged with the enemies of our country and mankind. On the morning of May 1st, we moved slowly up the road, shelling occasionally to find out the position of the enemy. About 12 o'clock we had driven in all the pickets and found the main body of the enemy stationed behind formidable breastworks, their front defended by an abattis of felled trees, which I supposed our generals thought too strong to attack, so General Jackson, taking a column, commenced a flank movement to their right through a dense pine forest, General Stuart clearing the road as we advanced. After 3 or 4 hours we found our division a mile in the rear of the enemy's lines, which extended across the Orange and Fredericksburg Plank Road, forming in line of battle. We advanced down the Plank Road, our line being 3 or 4 miles in length. Presently the sharp rattle of the musket told plainly that the pickets had commenced the engagement, which was to be the greatest defeat the Federal Army ever had and which was to cost us so many valuable lives. We came out of the woods, which had been concealing our movements, into an open field expecting every moment to engage the enemy, but they were so much taken by surprise that our pickets had driven their whole line, capturing one battery and about 500 prisoners, also killing one brigadier general, General Berry. We continued driving their rear until 9 o'clock at night, having crossed one line of breastworks which the enemy had hastily thrown up. After we got in the rear, line behind their breastworks, we intended waiting until morning to renew the fight, but the enemy, thinking to retrieve himself, made a night attack in which they partially succeeded in capturing one of our batteries, but soon we were in line again and recaptured our battery together with quite a number of prisoners. 'Twas in this fight that General Jackson lost his arm, but no one knew it until afterwards, as the old hero calmly sat upon his horse all the time, though his arm was almost shot off. The next morning, Sunday, everyone knew that the most terrible battle of the war must begin. We marched slowly down the road, all the time under the fire of several batteries of the enemy. We at first went on the left of the Plank Road, thinking the main body of the enemy were posted there, but soon we found out from pressure on our right that it was the enemy's strongest point, so we had to cross the road covered by the enemy's cannons. Here many a noble Southron fell to rise no more, among them General Paxton, who was shot through the heart, from which he died shortly afterwards. A piece of shell struck my knapsack, but was too spent to hurt me. We went about a quarter of a mile to the left and took position behind the front line of the enemy's breastworks, from which they had just before been driven. As soon as we were in line, our guns primed and bayonets fixed, General Stuart, he being in command of the corps, General Jackson and Hill both wounded, called out for old Stonewall to follow. We went over the breastworks with a yell, which was answered by a shower of leaden hail. Feeling that perhaps at that time prayers were going up at home for our protection, I became almost unconscious of danger, though men were falling thick and fast all around me. We halted and commenced firing at the enemy about 100 yards distant. We stood and fired until almost every man was killed or wounded, the force of the enemy being so greater than ours. Major Terry, commanding our regiment, gave the orders to fall back, but I was totally unconscious of what was going on and tried to rally the men. Then Major Terry came up to me and ordered me to fall back, as nearly all his regiment were killed or wounded. This letter is almost too long, but I could write more if I had time, but the mail leaves soon. Goodbye, Ted. Ted continues his saga of the Battle of Chancellorsville in a letter written on Tuesday, May 12th. Dear Sister, I wrote a letter home some days ago and have not received an answer. I suppose it is owing to the irregularity of the mails between here and Stanton, caused by the late raid of General Stoneman, and not any irregularity at home. In my last, I gave you an account of our moments up to Sunday evening. I will give an account of operations since that time. Sunday night we slept on the battlefield with the wounded and dead of both armies. Monday morning we moved in towards the enemy, who is now retreating toward the Rappahannock. We kept on until we came upon him, posted on a strong high hill strengthened by formidable breastworks. Many of the prisoners who came in that morning said they had another Malvern Hill ready for us. The country here is of such nature that the attacking party labors under a great disadvantage, having to advance through an almost endless forest, which give the enemy means to throw breastworks at every 200 or 300 yards with very little labor, which the attacking party have to carry at the point of the bayonet, there being no means of bringing artillery to bear upon them except where the fortifications cross the road, thereby causing us to lose a great many men while the enemy suffer comparatively little. Owing to this, I suppose General Lee determined to force the enemy from his position by strategy, so he recommended throwing breastworks around the enemy's position. I cannot describe the manner in which this was done unless I make a rough sketch of the position, which was this. So you see, General Lee had cut him off on both sides of the river, leaving only one means of retreat, namely across the Rappahannock. He could not hold his position because General Lee could cut all provisions sent to him. To keep from crossing the river, General Hooker ordered a movement to take place from Fredericksburg up the Rappahannock to force General Lee right, and then he, Hooker, could move down the river to Fredericksburg, but General Lee was again too smart for them. He, about facing his right, marched down the river, the enemy afraid to follow for fear of General Lee's left would get possession of the ford and his pontoons, also sending a division, General Jubal Early, in his rear. As soon as General John Sedgwick, who had the charge of the Yankee forces approaching the river, saw that General Early was in his rear and General Anderson in his front, he commenced retreating towards Fredericksburg and barely escaped being cut off by General Early. So Sedgwick escaped, though badly punished, as Anderson attacked him as he commenced his retreat, attacking him to drive him back upon Early and so capture all his force. But the Dutchman was too fleet for Early and regained the north bank of the Rappahannock, crossing where he came over. As he was crossing, our artillery played havoc with his forces crowded on his pontoons. General Hooker, finding his plans all foiled and rations getting scarce, determined to recross the river and claim a great victory and try another on to Richmond by a safer route and at a more favorable time. So this ends the 9th book in On to Richmond and the end of another Yankee general. The next morning we were ordered to take up the line of march for Fredericksburg, but as our knapsacks were left some miles in the rear as we went into the fight, we were sent back to get them. In doing so, we had to pass over the battlefield, and who can picture the horrors of that battlefield? Our own dead had been buried and the wounded removed, but the Yankee dead and wounded lay thickly over the field. Many had not yet had their wounds dressed and laying groaning on the wet ground, praying every passer-by to change their position or give them a drink of water. And now, as the excitement of battle was over, our men did all in their power to alleviate their suffering, thinking not of them as enemies who had come to subjugate us, but as suffering mortals. Their dead lay thick over the ground. Some seemed as though they had died without a struggle, without any visible wound, but the small mini-ball had done its work of death. Others could hardly be recognized as human bodies, mangled and torn by the solid shot, shell, and grape, and those showed how awful had been their suffering. With teeth clenched and hands deeply buried in the earth, they seemed to have suffered agonies before death released them. The poor horses were not spared. Here laid some literally torn to pieces, others with feet shot off, endeavoring in vain to get up. Our men humanely shot them as they would never get over their wounds. After getting our knapsacks, we marched to this camp, which had been called Camp Paxton in memory of General Paxton. A deep gloom is over the camp because of the death of General Jackson. He was taken away from us because we made almost an idol of him. Though we mourn his loss, still do we not feel we are without a leader. God is our leader and protector. He can raise up many a Jackson and will yet deliver us from the power of the enemy. I suppose before this his body has arrived in Lexington. My paper is out, so I will close. Goodbye, Ted. I hope you enjoyed this detailed account of the Battle of Chancellorsville. When we get to read these personal stories of soldiers who witnessed the horrors of war, it adds a whole new dimension to our understanding of the American Civil War. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.